The first sign wasn't the security guard giving me that awkward nod like I was walking into my own funeral. It wasn't even my badge going dead in my hand like it suddenly forgot who I was after 7 years. No. The real kick in the gut came when I opened the door to my corner office and found Harper Stevens sitting at my desk, feet up, sipping from a mug that read, "World's #1 Innovator." I'm Preston Mitchell, 48 years old, and I thought I knew corporate politics after 15 years in tech. Turns out I knew nothing. Harper looked up with this grin like she'd just won the lottery. "You must be Preston. I'm Harper, the new VP of Innovation." VP? 3 months ago I was running this department. My name was on the patents, the budget approvals, the hiring decisions. I was the one who built the autonomous vehicle AI that kept TechFlow Systems competitive when everyone thought we were going to get crushed by Tesla and Waymo. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and weekend coding sessions had led to this moment. Harper, with her fresh MBA from Stanford and that startup swagger, was sitting in my chair like it had always been hers. She couldn't have been older than 35, probably never wrote a line of production code in her life. She stood up with fake sympathy and pulled a manila envelope from my desk drawer. My desk drawer. HR wanted to handle this more formally, but I figured it would be more efficient to cut through the bureaucracy. Consider this your transition package. Inside were termination papers with severance numbers that would barely cover Emma's spring semester tuition at UT, the kind of insulting offer they give someone they assume won't fight back. I'd built their core technology from scratch, spent nights debugging algorithms while Harper was probably at business school learning how to make PowerPoint slides look important. I didn't yell, didn't slam anything, just smiled, grabbed the pen from her mug, and signed the visitor log at security. Asked if I needed an escort out. The guard didn't say a word, just buzzed me through like he'd been practicing this for weeks. That was it. 7 years reduced to a cardboard box and a handshake from a 22-year-old intern who probably didn't even know what machine learning was. I drove home to our house in Cedar Park in complete silence, that envelope riding shotgun like a death certificate. The automatic garage door opener, the one I'd been meaning to fix for months, suddenly seemed like the most important thing in the world. Normal life continuing while mine had just imploded. Sarah was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in. Spaghetti and meatballs, Lucas's favorite. He was at the dining room table with his calculus homework spread out, chewing on a pencil. Emma was home from UT for the weekend, sitting on the couch with her laptop, probably working on some sociology paper. "You're home early," Sarah said, not looking up from stirring the sauce. "How was your day?" I almost laughed. How was my day? I'd been professionally executed by someone young enough to be my daughter, who is now sitting in my office planning to take credit for 7 years of my work. But looking at my family, Sarah humming while she cooked, Lucas wrestling with derivatives, Emma typing away on whatever was due Monday, I couldn't bring myself to shatter this normal Tuesday evening. "Interesting," I said. "Really interesting." I poured myself 2 fingers of Maker's Mark and went to my home office, closed the door, sat in my reading chair and stared at that envelope like it might suddenly transform into something that made sense. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. The employment contract from when I first joined TechFlow. Back in 2017 when they were a scrappy startup desperate for talent, and I still had leverage from my Microsoft days. I'd been their first senior hire, the guy who was supposed to build their machine learning capabilities from the ground up. I found it in my filing cabinet, buried under mortgage papers and insurance documents. The contract was thick, full of legal language that had seemed so important back then. I flipped through pages of vacation policies, benefits descriptions, and standard non-disclosure agreements until I found what I was looking for. Clause 12.7, tucked between a section on intellectual property confidentiality and something about stock option vesting. The sentence I'd fought to include when they were hungry for my expertise and I was paranoid about getting screwed by another big tech company. All research and patentable intellectual property shall remain property of the originating party unless explicitly transferred in writing. I read it 3 times. My hands weren't shaking, but my heart was doing something weird in my chest. No transfer documents had ever been signed. Not when I filed the first patent in 2018, not during any of my annual reviews, not even when they promoted me to senior director in 2020. And I wasn't just a contributor to the research, I was the research. 4 core patents for machine learning optimization in autonomous vehicle navigation systems. Every algorithm, every training dataset, every breakthrough moment at 2 a.m. when the code finally worked. My name was on every filing as the sole inventor. Harper had just fired the guy who owned the keys to their entire IP portfolio. And apparently, nobody at TechFlow had bothered to check who actually owned what they'd been building their company around. Here's the thing about being 48 and getting blindsided by corporate politics. You've been around long enough to know there's always more to the story. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't even pretend to try. Around midnight, I gave up and went back to the kitchen. Spread those termination papers across the dining table like I was planning a military campaign. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and Lucas's Xbox controller clicking. Away upstairs. Kid never could sleep on school nights. I started going through old emails on my personal laptop, searching for anything related to patent filings, IP discussions, or legal documentation. 7 years of digital breadcrumbs that might prove what I was starting to suspect, that TechFlow had built their entire Series B pitch on technology they didn't legally own. The first smoking gun was easy to find. An email thread from March 2018, when I'd filed the initial patent for adaptive neural networks in collision avoidance systems. The company lawyer, some fresh-faced kid from UT Law, had asked me to sign a standard IP assignment form. I'd refused, citing my employment contract. He'd escalated to the CEO, Calvin Torres, who'd basically shrugged and said they'd deal with it later. Later never came. I found 3 more similar email chains over the years. Each time legal would ask about transferring patent ownership to the company. Each time, I'd point to Clause 12.7. Each time, they'd punt the decision down the road. It was like watching a slow-motion corporate train wreck that nobody wanted to acknowledge. By 3 a.m., I had a timeline. 4 patents filed between 2018 and 2022, 0 transfer documents, multiple attempts by legal to clarify ownership that went nowhere because nobody wanted to rock the boat while I was still producing results. The irony was beautiful. They'd kept me around because I was valuable, but they'd never bothered to actually own what made me valuable. And now they'd fired me while planning to pitch my algorithms to investors who'd run screaming if they knew the truth. I pulled up TechFlow's website and checked their recent press releases. There it was, dated just last week. TechFlow Systems announces Series B funding round. Revolutionary AI platform powers next-generation autonomous vehicles. $25 million investment opportunity. The press release was full of Harper's buzzword salad, cutting-edge machine learning capabilities, proprietary neural network architecture, industry-leading collision detection algorithms. Every single technical capability mentioned was something I'd developed, tested, and patented under my own name. I started laughing. Not the funny kind of laughing, the kind that happens when you realize the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Harper wasn't just stealing my job. She was about to commit securities fraud using my intellectual property as the bait. Around 5 a.m., Sarah found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups. She was wearing her old UT sweatshirt, hair pulled back in that messy bun that meant she'd been having trouble sleeping too. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "And don't say nothing." I know that look. So I told her. About Harper, about the patents, about the employment contract clause that might be the key to everything. Sarah had been with me through the Microsoft years, through the startup grind, through every late night when I was building something I believed in. She understood the tech world better than most spouses. "How much is the company worth if they get this funding?" she asked. "Without my patents?" "Nothing. The autonomous vehicle platform is their entire value proposition." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Sarah had always been the practical one in our relationship, the one who read the fine print on contracts while I focused on the technical details. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out exactly what they think they own versus what they actually own. And then I'm going to make some phone calls." The first call was to Pierce Reynolds. Pierce and I had known each other since the early Microsoft days, back when Austin's tech scene was small enough that everyone knew everyone. He'd moved into IP litigation after getting burned by a startup that had stolen his code, then went in-house at Dell before starting his own practice. "Preston, didn't expect to hear from you this early," Pierce said when he picked up. "It was barely 8 a.m. You still handle IP disputes?" "Depends what kind of dispute we're talking about." I gave him the summary. Employment contract, patent ownership, company valuation based on potentially stolen intellectual property. Pierce got very quiet as I talked. You still have the original contract? I'm looking at it right now. And no assignment agreements were ever signed? Nothing. I've got email threads going back years where legal kept asking and I kept saying no. Preston, if what you're telling me is accurate, this isn't just an employment dispute. This is a potential securities violation. They're raising money based on assets they don't own. We agreed to meet that afternoon at his office downtown. I spent the morning organizing everything into a coherent file. Contract excerpts, patent documentation, email threads, press releases, and the Series B announcement that was basically a confession in corporate speak. But first, I needed to understand exactly what TechFlow was planning to pitch to investors. That meant reaching out to someone still inside the company who might be willing to share information. Brooke Sullivan had been my project coordinator for 3 years before they moved her to strategic communications in one of Calvin's endless reorganizations. Smart as hell, loyal to the people who'd helped her career, and professionally frustrated by having to translate my technical work into marketing copy for people who didn't understand it. I sent her a message through LinkedIn. Coffee sometime? Been thinking about the old team and wanted to catch up. Her response came back in 10 minutes. Heard what happened. That's messed up. When and where? The reply included a phone number and a note. Probably better to talk than type. I called her from my car parked in the lot behind Central Market where nobody from TechFlow would accidentally spot me. Preston, I can't believe they did that to you, Brooke said. Half the engineering team is ready to quit. Nobody understands how Harper got promoted over you. What's the word internally about the Series B? Harper's been running around like she invented fire, keeps talking about her vision for autonomous systems. It's your algorithms, Preston. Same code, same training data, just rebranded with different PowerPoint themes. That confirmed what I suspected, but I needed specifics. Are they presenting to investors? Next week. Texas Innovation Conference. Calvin and Harper are doing the main presentation. Harper specifically requested your old slide deck as reference material. My old slide deck. The one with performance metrics from algorithms I developed, tested, and patented entirely on my own. They weren't just using my work, they were literally presenting my presentations to people who might invest $25 million based on technology they didn't own. Brooke, I need a favor, and I want you to know you can say no. What kind of favor? The kind that might save everyone's job when this implodes. Brooke met me at that coffee shop on South Lamar where tech people go to avoid running into their coworkers. She looked nervous, kept checking her phone like she expected Calvin Torres to materialize behind her with a termination notice. I brought you something, she said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. Harper's been using your original presentation deck for investor meetings. Same slides, same performance metrics, just with her name in the footer. She doesn't even understand half the technical terms. I plugged the drive into my laptop. There it was. My work from 2021 showing real-world testing results for the collision avoidance algorithm. Data I'd collected driving test routes around Austin for 6 months, measuring reaction times and accuracy rates. Harper had kept everything intact except the attribution. There's more, Brooke said. The Series B presentation is scheduled for June 15th at the Texas Innovation Conference. Main stage presentation, 45 minutes with live Q&A. Calvin's doing the business overview, Harper's handling the technical deep dive. Harper was going to stand in front of venture capitalists and automotive executives, presenting algorithms she couldn't code, explaining research she'd never conducted, claiming credit for patents she didn't own. It would be beautiful if it weren't potentially criminal. Brooke, when this all comes out, and it will come out, you need to have clean hands. Don't take any documents you're not supposed to have. Don't forward any emails. Just keep your head down and let me handle this. She nodded. Preston, for what it's worth, everyone knows this is wrong. Harper's been telling people you were transitioned out to pursue other opportunities, like you quit to start your own company or something. That actually made me smile. In a way, Harper wasn't wrong. My meeting with Pierce that afternoon was in his downtown office, one of those converted warehouses in the East Austin tech corridor. Pierce had done well for himself. Corner office, law books that looked actually used, and a view of the lake that probably cost more than my annual salary. This is worse than I thought, Pierce said, looking through my file. They're not just using your IP without permission. They're actively misrepresenting ownership to potential investors. That's securities fraud territory. He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Here's what we know. You own 4 core patents that represent the foundation of their autonomous vehicle platform. Your employment contract explicitly protects your IP rights. They've never obtained proper transfer documentation despite multiple opportunities. And now they're raising $25 million based on technology they don't legally own. What's our play? We let them hang themselves. They're presenting publicly in 2 weeks. Once they make material misstatements about IP ownership to investors, we've got them on securities violations in addition to theft of intellectual property. Pierce leaned back in his chair. But Preston, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about getting your job back or embarrassing Harper. If we pursue this, we're potentially talking about unwinding a $25 million funding round. People could lose their jobs. The company might not survive. I thought about that. About my former colleagues who'd done nothing wrong except work for idiots. About Lucas and Emma, who'd grown up hearing me talk about building something meaningful at TechFlow. About Sarah, who'd supported every late night and weekend when I was convinced I was building the future of transportation safety. Pierce, I didn't create this situation. They did. I gave them 7 years of my life and the best work I've ever done. If they'd treated me with basic respect, if they'd negotiated a fair licensing agreement, if they'd just not fired me for someone half my age who doesn't understand the technology, we wouldn't be here. Fair enough. So, what do you want the end game to look like? I'd been thinking about that since 3 a.m. I want my IP rights recognized and properly compensated. I want Harper removed from any position where she can take credit for my work. And I want Calvin Torres to understand that loyalty and competence matter more than MBA buzzwords and corporate politics. Sounds reasonable. Here's how we do it. Pierce's strategy was elegant. We'd let TechFlow proceed with their investor presentation, documenting everything they claimed about their proprietary technology. Meanwhile, he'd quietly reach out to Morrison & Associates, the due diligence firm handling the Series B background checks. IP verification is standard procedure for any tech investment this size, Pierce explained. All we need to do is raise some questions about patent ownership. Once due diligence starts digging, they'll discover the truth on their own. The next week was the longest of my professional life. I went through the motions of looking for a new job, updating my LinkedIn profile, reaching out to contacts at other Austin tech companies. But my real focus was tracking TechFlow's public statements about their upcoming investor presentation. Calvin had given an interview to Austin Business Journal about their revolutionary autonomous vehicle platform. Harper was quoted in TechCrunch talking about proprietary machine learning algorithms that represent a breakthrough in collision avoidance technology. Every article made me angrier and more determined. The breakthrough they were describing? I'd had it in my garage in 2019, testing code on a jury-rigged Honda Civic with sensors I'd bought on Amazon. The revolutionary platform? Built in my spare bedroom during the early pandemic months when nobody knew if the company would survive. 3 days before the investor presentation, Pierce made his move, a simple email to Morrison & Associates attached with publicly available patent records and a polite inquiry about IP ownership verification for TechFlow's autonomous vehicle technology. Just enough to get them asking questions, Pierce said. Once due diligence firms start pulling threads, they don't stop until they find out where everything leads. The first sign that our plan was working came Wednesday morning. Brooke texted me from a number I didn't recognize. Legal team in emergency session. Something about patent documentation. Harper freaking out. That afternoon, Calvin Torres got a call from Morrison & Associates with some routine questions about intellectual property ownership. Simple stuff. Just verifying that TechFlow owned the patents they were claiming as core assets for the Series B valuation. The problem was they didn't. And Calvin was about to find out. Pierce called me that evening. They know. TechFlow's legal team spent all day trying to find transfer documents that don't exist. Calvin's probably calling an emergency board meeting as we speak. What happens next? They'll try to fix this quietly. Probably offer you a settlement to make the problem go away before it becomes public. But Preston, once you sign anything, you lose leverage. Make sure you're ready for whatever they're going to offer. I was ready. I'd been ready since that first night when I found Clause 12.7 and realized that sometimes the fine print you fight for when nobody's watching becomes the weapon you need when everybody's looking. The call came Friday morning at 7 a.m. Calvin Torres himself, not legal, not HR, just the CEO of TechFlow Systems, suddenly very interested in having a conversation with the guy they'd fired 2 weeks earlier. Preston, we need to talk. The emergency board call was scheduled for Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I dialed in from Pierce's office. camera off, watching the participant list light up like a Christmas tree. Everyone was there. Calvin Torres looking like he'd aged 5 years over the weekend, board chair Susan Martinez, 2 investor representatives, external IP counsel and general legal counsel, and me, not listed as former employee or terminated staff, just Preston Mitchell, required attendance. "We have a situation requiring immediate resolution," Susan began, her voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that only comes from discovering your company is built on quicksand. Calvin cleared his throat. During final investor due diligence for our Series B round, questions emerged regarding ownership of our core autonomous vehicle IP, specifically the patents that represent the foundation of our technology platform. The external IP counsel didn't waste time with corporate diplomacy. "I've reviewed all documentation provided by TechFlow Systems. There are no patent assignment agreements on file. All 4 foundational patents list Preston Mitchell as sole inventor with no legal transfer to the company." Beautiful silence. The kind of silence that happens when an entire boardroom realizes they've been selling something they don't own. "What exactly does that mean?" asked one of the investor reps, a woman whose voice suggested she already knew the answer and didn't like it. "It means Mr. Mitchell owns the patents, all of them. The collision avoidance algorithms, the neural network architecture, the predictive modeling systems, everything TechFlow has been marketing as proprietary technology." That's when I unmuted. "Morning, everyone. Funny thing about intellectual property, you actually have to own it before you can sell it to investors." The next hour was the most satisfying professional conversation of my life. Watching Calvin stumble through explanations for how they'd built a $25 million valuation around technology owned by the guy they'd just fired. Listening to Harper, who'd finally joined audio only, try to argue that my work was developed under company resources while Pierce calmly referenced the employment contract that said otherwise. "We'd like to offer you reinstatement," Calvin said eventually. "Same position, full back pay, complete control of the engineering team." "I appreciate the offer," I said. "But I'm not coming back. I'm a vendor now." Pierce had drafted our terms over the weekend. Non-exclusive licensing agreement for all autonomous vehicle-related IP, 3-year term with automatic renewal unless either party objects. Market rate fees calculated at $400,000 annually, with cost of living adjustments tied to the Austin Tech Salary Index, plus retroactive licensing fees from the date of my termination. And full disclosure requirements. Any derivative work had to be reviewed for IP dependency before internal patent filings. Oh, and one more thing. All public materials had to include proper attribution, autonomous vehicle technology licensed under Mitchell Advanced Systems Protocol. "This is aggressive," their counsel protested. "No," Pierce replied smoothly. "This is generous, Mr. Mitchell could withdraw licensing rights entirely and force TechFlow to rebuild their entire platform from scratch. Instead, he's offering market rate access to technology that's already proven and tested. They signed everything by Thursday. What choice did they have?" The Series B investors were already asking uncomfortable questions. 2 funds had put their commitments on hold pending resolution of IP ownership concerns. Every day they hesitated cost more than my entire licensing package. Harper disappeared from the company website the following week. No farewell announcement, no LinkedIn post about pursuing new opportunities. Just gone. Brooke told me through our back channels that she'd been transitioned to a consulting role with another company. Corporate speak for fired, but with enough severance to keep quiet. Calvin sent one final message through legal. "Hope this arrangement works for everyone involved." I didn't respond directly. Pierce sent a professional acknowledgement and a reminder that all future communications should go through counsel. I wasn't their employee anymore. I was their most expensive vendor, and they were going to treat me accordingly. The real celebration happened that evening at home. Sarah had made lasagna, Emma's favorite this time, and opened a bottle of wine that we'd been saving for a special occasion. College graduation maybe, or Lucas getting into his first choice university. "So what happens now?" Emma asked. She was home for the weekend, taking a break from her sophomore economics coursework to hear about her dad's corporate revenge story. "Now I start my own company," I said. "Mitchell Advanced Systems, AI consulting for automotive and transportation companies." "Will you miss TechFlow?" Lucas asked. I thought about that. 7 years of building something I believed in, working with smart people on problems that mattered. Then I thought about Harper sitting in my office, Calvin's complete lack of loyalty, and the casual way they'd assumed I'd just disappear quietly. "I'll miss the work," I said, "but I won't miss working for people who don't value what I bring to the table." The first client contract came 2 weeks later. A startup in Dallas working on delivery drones, looking for someone who understood machine learning optimization in safety-critical systems. The second was a major automotive supplier in Detroit, tired of paying licensing fees to the big tech companies for algorithms that weren't as good as what I'd developed. Within 6 months, Mitchell Advanced Systems had 5 corporate clients and a waiting list. TechFlow was still my biggest customer. They had to be, given how dependent their platform was on my patents. But they were paying market rate for the privilege. The Austin Business Journal ran a feature story about local tech entrepreneurs who'd started successful consulting firms. The article mentioned my amicable transition from TechFlow Systems to independent consulting, which was corporate journalism speak for "we don't want to get sued for telling the real story." But the tech community knew. Word travels fast in Austin's startup scene, especially when someone gets screwed over and finds a way to turn the tables. I started getting invited to speak at conferences, serve on advisory boards, mentor other engineers who were thinking about going independent. At 48, I'd learned that getting fired isn't the end of your career. Sometimes it's just the beginning of owning it completely. Lucas got into MIT early admission with a full scholarship. Emma's tuition was covered through graduation. Sarah's medical insurance was secure through my new business. And every quarterly report that TechFlow published included a line item for licensed IP costs that basically amounted to paying me to use my own work. Not bad for a guy who was supposedly too old to understand digital transformation.